Hello there everyone, Arya here, Pop here. Thank you so much for joining me once again on yet another excursion as we dive into the question of whether or not the worst monsters are no longer hiding in the dark, but out there in the light of the technology beaming right into our faces. Imagine you and your gaming buddies discover that someone among you may be a killer, but you have no idea who or where they are. Today's case centers around Discord, a platform many of you may be familiar with from our own Discord server, which is linked in the description below. But if not, Discord is a service that allows its users to join different groups called, servers. These are usually communities centered around a shared interest, such as a video game or something, or in our case, it's just a gaggle of criminals coming together to hang out online, talk true crime, the supernatural, and all other kind of, tomfoolery. But once you're on that server, users, you can voice chat, make video calls, instant message, participate in polls. I make myself sound very old when I explain what Discord is. That said, this case unfolds on a private Discord server called Perfect World Void. Perfect World Void is a server dedicated to the online multiplayer role-playing game Perfect World. On July 27th, 2019, a member of the server known only as Menhaz logged on and sent something eerie. His message read, "Gonna kill my parents and go to jail, yo," followed by, "This is my mom." He then sent 2 photos, each of a different woman who appeared bloodied and possibly dead. He also claimed the second woman was his grandmother. At first, some weren't sure what to make of it. This user had posted offensive content before, including comments deemed racist and prejudiced toward Muslims, self-deprecating comments, and mentions of suicide. He'd even been temporarily banned from the server earlier that month for these kinds of posts. Was this edgy trolling? Something that Menhaz intended to be funny or shocking, even if it hadn't been received that way? Some members were immediately concerned and attempted to verify whether or not the images were real. One user, known only as John, tried to compare the images with others already available online. He sought out the help of other people on the server, including a user named Nicole. Nicole, who was interviewed in the documentary Perfect World, A Deadly Game, said she felt confident the photos were real. It was just a matter of figuring out whether or not they were actually taken by Menhaz or had actually been sourced from a shock site. A shock site, is essentially a site that posts collected images for the sake of just, disgusting, scaring, or offending users with its content. And I won't lie. In my youth, I may have, frequented shock sites to give a little spook to friends and family. Definitely don't visit those sites if you're a minor. And if you aren't a minor, if you visit those sites, fair warning, you're not in for a fun time. The group reverse image searched the photos through Google and other search engines. They came up with no matches. With the likelihood of the photos and claims being true becoming more and more likely, emotions were escalating. A member of the server known as Junior began messaging Menhaz about whether or not the photos were real. Menhaz finally responded, "This may upset you, but I did it." Menhaz then threatened to kill his father and sister as well. With several members convinced of Menhaz's threats, there was a push to try and stop what could be coming next. However, there was no identifiable information about Menhaz on the international server, which hosts members from China to Romania to Costa Rica. Menhaz could be anywhere. The story of how the place eventually located Menhaz's address is disputed among sources. By one account, server members worked to trace the IP address connected to the Menhaz account. Initially, this narrowed down the location to the incredibly populated city of Toronto, Canada. After Menhaz logged back on, this allowed them another chance to narrow down the location. Unfortunately, this supposedly led to the internet provider associated with the account rather than the actual home address of the user. Other sources claim that the Toronto police worked directly with Discord and the internet provider associated with the IP address to find Menhaz's home address. And yet another source claims a fellow member of the server, Bianca, was able to trace PayPal activity made by Menhaz to a physical address, which she supposedly provided to the police herself. What is widely agreed upon by several members that have spoken out about the event is that they were adamant in trying to get the word out to any authorities or outlets that would listen. On July 28th, the next day, Toronto police arrived at Menhaz's home to perform a wellness check in regards to what he had written on Discord. The user was identified as 23-year-old Menhaz Zaman, who was living in his parents' home in Markham, Ontario, a city less than 20 miles from Toronto. Before Menhaz answered the door, he left one final statement on the server: "The police are here. Goodbye." Authorities entered the Zaman residence to discover the bodies of 4 family members. Through the interrogation and investigation process, the story of this tragedy began to unfold. Menhaz later pleaded guilty to the following events, which took place over the course of 9 hours from the afternoon of July 27th to the early hours of July 28th. First, he killed his mother, 50-year-old Momotaz Begum, and grandmother 70-year-old Feroza Begum, around 3 p.m. He then played video games and spent time online, as his sister and father were at work and not expected to be home for a few hours. I'm certainly not qualified to give a diagnosis, but when you think of kind of like the stereotypes of a sociopath, I mean, a guy who kills his mother and grandmother and then is able to play video games. His sister, 21-year-old Melissa Zaman, returned home from work around 11 p.m. Menhaz killed her and waited for his father, 59-year-old Moniruz Zaman, who walked in the door around an hour or so later and met the same fate as his mother, wife, and daughter. Absolutely horrifying. All 4 victims were hit over the head with an object thought to possibly be a crowbar, and then had their throats cut. Menhaz was charged and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder, resulting in a life sentence. Menhaz will not be eligible for parole until 40 years after the start of his prison time, at 64 years old, a decision he did not protest. At the time of his initial arrest and interrogation, Menhaz denied having a motive, stating he just killed them. However, when pleading guilty to the charges, he agreed to a statement of facts provided in court, which unveiled a double life of sorts. Menhaz's parents believed their son had been studying mechanical engineering at York University. In fact, they believed he was set to graduate on July 28th, the day after their deaths. In reality, Menhaz had dropped out of Seneca College years prior after briefly studying electrical engineering for a couple of semesters. Since then, he'd continued the ruse, leaving the house to supposedly attend classes when he was really at the mall or the gym, often logging hours on games like Perfect World. When the graduation would not be taking place as they thought, they would finally learn the truth. His history on the Perfect World Void server provided some possible context for this narrative. In one message, Menhaz claimed he felt like he had to kill his family because "I don't want my parents to feel the shame of having a son like me." In another, he connected his atheism to what he described as a long-standing plan. "I choose to kill them instead out of my cowardness due to me being an atheist. I believe that this is the only life we get. And I know it might sound confusing, but what's done is done, and what had been planned has been concluded." Religion, or the lack thereof, was a common theme in Menhaz's messages prior to July 27th. He'd often made negative or derogatory remarks about Islam, the religion his family practiced and he was raised in, often described as racist by other members of the server. In fact, his refusal to pull back on these kind of comments had been what earned him a ban from the server earlier that month. I will say, don't know why they let him back in. Justice Michelle Furst, the judge overseeing his case, was highly critical of this possible motive. No right-thinking member of society would see any correlation between the imminent disclosure of the secret of Mr. Zaman's non-attendance at school and the vicious taking of the lives of the 4 people closest to him. During a sentencing hearing in 2020, Menhaz directly spoke on his involvement in the killings, saying, "I would like to just apologize to anyone I have impacted negatively with my actions, especially to the people who knew my family, friends and loved ones who I know could have never seen something like this from me happening. I am sorry." Upon learning about the identity and actions of Menhaz, administrators of the Perfect World Void server wrote a statement on what they called the Markham Massacre. They mentioned Menhaz's previous behavior and ban, admitting they had mostly chalked it up to an extreme sense of humor at first. In response, they noted that any behavior from now on that was deemed suspicious, abnormal, or harassment from that point forward would result in a server ban, including talks of this very incident within the Void platforms. Making their stance on the issue clear, they also stated, "Regardless of if he was my friend or not, your friend or not, murder is selfish. Murder can never be justified." I think this is a case where the crime might have been committed regardless of whether or not Menhaz was online. It's just interesting to see how Discord played quite a prominent role in both the crime, or rather the aftermath of the crime, and him sharing photos, but also in the members of this Discord server attempting to get law enforcement involved. So ultimately, I think as far as the question of whether or not the worst monsters are hiding, in the dark or in the light of the technology in our faces, I think in this case, Menhaz was someone who was very deeply troubled, to the point where he was able to play video games after killing his mother and grandmother. I don't think, for example, that he committed these murders for like Discord clout or something. And so here we have an example, I think, of just a monster in everyday life, a monster within a family. I mean, to take the lives of your parents, your sister, your grandmother, I mean, that's... As always, though, I do appreciate you being here with me as we walk into the abyss together. Either way, thank you for sticking around. As always, I hope to see you all very soon. And in the meantime, please take care and stay safe online.